The creator spirit of Heliopolis is usually addressed as Atum or Tem, an Egyptian word that means to complete or to be completed. For it was Atum who brought creation to completion in the beginning. The title Atum sometimes bears the prefix of Nefer, the Egyptian word for beauty. So Nefertum means beauty that has come to completion. This title applies to the god's primordial identity as a beautiful blue water lily, the first living being to ever arise from the Nile. As a god, Nefertum is typically portrayed as a personified water lily stalk in full flourishing. He usually wears a crown composed of 2 erect ostrich plumes, which we interpret in our episode entitled Fields of Ra as a symbol of a lotus bud, because the 2 upright blue ostrich plumes represent a water lily's upright blue petals that stand erect when the flower is in bud. These petals, or plumes if you will, reflects downward to open the flower and bring it to its full completion in its beauty at the dawning of the Egyptian sun. Note also that Nefertum frequently carries a lotus stalk in his hand, which has an ostrich plume emerging from the corolla. That plume is a symbol of Mat, the enduring truth of natural order. Nefertum also wields a wasp scepter or a flail at times, both of which attributes are inherited by his grandson Osiris-Ra, and both represent power over the Nile. In the pyramid texts, Atum arises from the chaos of an aquatic abyss known as Nu, while spell number 80 of the coffin texts, of relatively later origin, implies that Ra, the creative luminosity of the cosmos, was actually the first god to, quote, knit Atum together to make firm the head of Isis on her neck and to fashion the spine of Khepera, the beetle form of Atum. An alternative coffin text actually suggests that Atum and Ra are one and the same deity, the same Lord of an everlasting beaming light that upholds his own shining being in the form of a divine scarab beetle known as Khepera. These mythic perspectives are generally consistent with inscriptions in the Papyrus of Ani from the 17th chapter of the Book of the Dead, which states, and I quote, "I am the god Nefertum in rising. I am the only one. I came into existence in Nu, the abyssal waters of the Nile. I am Ra, who rose in the beginning. It is Ra, the creator of the names of his limbs. I am yesterday, I am today. Yesterday is Osiris, and today is Ra. It is Osiris, or Ra is his name, or it is the phallus of Ra, wherewith he was united to himself." These symbolic themes, then, apply directly to the blue lotus of the Nile, because Nefertum is that lotus. And that either blurs or reverses the distinctive roles of Atum and Ra, the earliest pyramid texts of Heliopolis, which were chiseled in stone at least 1,000 years before the authorship of inscriptions found on coffins and within coffins in the Book of the Dead. The pyramid texts claim that Nefertum, the floral manifestation of Atum at the beginning of time, and these are the first records, first appeared to the world as a lotus blossom, such that he could place his sweet-smelling flower to the nose of his first creation, and that would be Ra, the sun. Nefertum, i.e., beauty made manifest, from disorder, is described explicitly in the pyramid text as he who first came into being. At which point, Nefertum proceeds to take hold of his soul phallus, which has just arisen from the abyssal waters of Nu, to masturbate. While attaining the world's first orgasm, his ejaculation, which is either called an emission, an ashes, or a spittle, a tef, fertilizes the waters and banks of the Nile. His so-called spittle also gives birth to his two immediate offspring, namely Shu and Tefnut, the first generation of divine siblings of the Ennead. To paraphrase a translation of a pyramid text by Budge, this Pepi, the name referring to a deceased pharaoh who is being transformed into the creator, this Pepi washes himself in the lake of reeds, wherein Ra washes himself. Horus has brought the back of Pepi, and Thoth has brought the legs of Pepi, and Shu has uplifted him into the sky. And Nut, the sky goddess, stretches out her hand to Pepi. For Atum has departed to Anu to satisfy his love of orgasms. He has thrust his member into his hand and performed his desire, and has produced two children, Shu and Tefnut. And these two children put Pepi, the deceased pharaoh, between them, establishing him among the gods that thrive in this field of offering. That's an early inscription on a very ancient and massive pyramid near Cairo today. So Nefertum is described symbolically as both a lotus stalk and an aquatic phallus, an association that I believe derives from the phallic aspect of budding lotus stalks when they emerge from their watery source. The pyramid texts also make repeated references to Atum's mythical insect form, a scarab beetle, Khepera by name. Khepera is an Egyptian verb that means to form, to create, or to become, which obviously relates to Atum's role as the creator. So Nefertum, as a blue flower, is simultaneously envisioned in early Egyptian mythology as a blue-feathered beetle, who similarly bursts with a life-engendering cosmic seed. In utterance 222 of the pyramid text, Khepera stands up on the banks of the Nile and issues his spittle, a mythic gesture that is inherited, as we shall soon see, by subsequent generations of the Ennead. Khepera amulets and talismans were apparently a very popular item to possess in ancient Egypt, as we find many of them in coffins and among Egyptian ruins. They were typically manufactured in either the color of green or blue, suggesting their symbolic connections to lotus buds and flowers. But the disc that Khepera elevates within his outstretched blue wings is typically rendered in gold or orange. And more often than not, a pair of similar discs are observed to either side of the central orb, thus forming a triad of discs. This standard iconographic practice clearly relates to a thrice-born water lily blossom, whose natural 3-day lifespan reveals its golden floral disc, the flower's flat and round pistil, on 3 successive days before it submerges itself back underwater to develop into a capsule with seeds. And so, in the beginning, we are already introduced to a number of seemingly unlikely symbolic associations between a lotus flower, a human phallus, the sun, and a scarab beetle. Viva Egypt. Ra himself is said to possess the same phallus in the coffin texts, and a phallus that will be inherited and similarly be given to ejaculate generously by the next 3 generations of divine beings, all of whom share the floral features of their primeval progenitor. We are going to find that the seed of Nefertum runs deep in the Ennead. Just as a quick aside here, it is noteworthy that the primordial creator of the cosmos in the tradition at Thebes of what we call the Hermopolitans, the people from what the Greeks referred to as the city of Hermes, Hermopolis. Again, an ancient urban center of Egypt that is far removed, however, from Heliopolis, but probably of similar age, is entitled Amun-Ra instead of Atum-Ra. This god's title connotes a hidden source, Amun, meaning hidden, of the sun, Ra, Amun-Ra, which is to suggest that Amun-Ra's being, aspect of the sun, lays hidden, like that of Nefertum, in the fields of Ra, or the fields of hiding, the Amentet, below the abyssal waters of Nu. Amun-Ra of Hermopolis commanded a pantheon, a distinctive pantheon that was celebrated at the popular temple complex of modern-day Karnak, where the famous biblical pharaoh, known as Ramses II, shared a throne with his creator spirit and his divine consort, known as either Amunet or Mut. As you can see here, Ramses takes center stage and shares the same double-plumed disc crown of his father Amun. Now, iconographically, one cannot distinguish images of Amun-Ra of the Hermopolitan tradition with images of Nefertum-Ra of the Heliopolitan tradition, insofar as they wear the same crown and often display an erect phallus in the presence of a lotus flower. And in keeping with iconographic records, the well-known hymn to Amun-Ra from around 3,800 years ago on an old papyrus text specifically identifies both Nefertum and his beetle avatar, Khepera, as aspects of Amun-Ra. In doing so, they clearly confirm the equivalencies of cosmogenesis in Heliopolis in relation to those of Hermopolis. To quote a Budge translation of the hymn of Amun-Ra, this is the god Amun, not Atum. Thou art the fashioner of mortals, the creator, the maker of all things which are in the name of Atum Khepera. Thou art the great hawk which gladdeneth the body, the beautiful face which gladdeneth the breast. You are the form of many gods with a lofty crown. Evidently, only the names of creators have changed, not the mythic and symbolic essentials. Furthermore, Amun-Ra was similarly referenced by the authors of the pyramid texts in Heliopolis, who make clear that a second-generation descendant of Nefertum, the earth god Geb, occupies the throne, they say, of Amun At On, that would be Heliopolis. The Egyptians, wherever they were pretty much on the same page. The double-plumed lotus bud symbol seems to relate as well to a common mythic motif of Egyptian creator gods, and this is their habit of hatching from a divine egg in the field of reeds. Coffin text 81 identifies Atum as a primordial being that rises and shines from a cosmic egg that hatches out of the creator's birthplace, which is a marshland known as the Amentet, the hidden place. This same egg is the source of the last creative act of the Ennead, and that would be the youthful sun god known as Horus-Ra, the blue falcon, whose cosmic egg is conceived by his mother Isis after repeated conjugal acts with the phallus of her husband, her consort, Osiris. Yet another text notes that it is Ra himself, a self-created god from the fields of reeds, who is said to gather fluid within his own egg. Fluid within the sun. Now, once again, my ethnobotanical logic compels me to insist that an Egyptian sun is unlikely to gather fluid into anything. Quite the contrary. Egyptian suns are prone to remove fluids from anything that produces water. On the other hand, the sun-like flowers of a water lily actually fill themselves to the brim with a watery nectar during the first day of flowering, the biological function of which is to wash pollen grains off visiting bees and flies, their pollinators. No other flowering plant in the world has this habit. And this would conceivably represent the fluid of an egg, a bud, that opens itself with blue feathers of a symbolic falcon, or indeed of various symbolic waterfowl that symbolize various members of the Ennead in the proverbial field of reeds. These divine birds would include Thoth, the sacred ibis, the Bennu bird, who normally takes the form of a blue heron or falcon in hieroglyphic scriptures, or various kites and swallows who flit about the field of Ra as the protectors and nursemaids of the sun god Horus, namely Isis and Nephthys. And then there is the divine creator goose, known as Kenkenu, of the Hermopolitan tradition, who is identified as well, in any case, with the Heliopolitan creator Nefertum in the Papyrus of Nu, which proclaims, and bear in mind that Nefertum is the blue lotus, "Hail, O Nefertum! Grant unto me the sweet breath which dwells in the nostrils. I am the egg which is in Kenkenu, the great bird. I germinate as it germinates. I live as it lives, and I breathe as it breathes." Once again, we connect the dots. The symbolic associations between blue petals of the water lily and the blue plumes of Egypt's golden discs in the context of various avian sun gods seems to favor a floral interpretation of Ra rather than a solar interpretation. This does not deny, of course, the obvious role of the sun in Egyptian cosmology, because the sun-like flower opens and closes to the rising and setting of the sun. But it does reorient our general perspectives on Egyptian mythology and theology in a big way. The widespread use of scarab beetle imagery to represent Nefertum-Ra throughout Egyptian history provides an instructive model to test the hypothesis that the Nilotic lotus was the common denominator of Egyptian symbolism. Renderings of this creature in a quasi-personified form suggest that Nefertum's primordial characteristics were inherited by his 4th and 5th generation divine descendants. The beetle god that we observe on the left has grasped his erect phallus in one hand while uplifting his flail in the other, both of which features belong to Osiris-Ra, the great-grandson of Nefertum, and to Nefertum himself, because the characteristics of this deity reflect the early attributes of Nefertum in the ancient pyramid texts, as he masturbates before a lotus flower and a libation vessel. The ithyphallic, the erect falcon, that we observe on the right, who shares the same crown and flail of Nefertum, represents Horus, the great-great-grandson of the cosmic beetle and the son of Osiris. The image of Khepera as a beetle-headed man, however, on the exquisite polychrome murals in the tomb of Nefertari, the historical consort of Ramses the Great, assumes once again the throne and signatory attributes of Osiris. Note that the throne's side panel is decorated with a papyrus and lotus motif, this being a symbol for sovereignty over the upper and lower reaches of the Nile. And also notice the drooping water lily stalk that dangles between the god's knees, bearing the standard 2 plumes of Nefertum. As already noted, the crowns of these gods are symbolic of a lotus bud, and therefore symbolize the primordial flower of creation, thereby complementing a passage from the Papyrus of Ani that states, "Khepera, the mighty hawk, who makes glad the body, beautiful of face on account of your 2 plumes. Awake, Lord of Beauty, at dawn in the company of the gods." Many spectacular pieces of jewelry that were worn by pharaohs as pectorals portray Khepera ascending directly from a lotus grove, and usually as a triad of blue-winged beetles, or otherwise as a beetle in the presence of 3 golden discs. The same symbolic convention applies to the lotus god Horus, whose falcon form can be at times associated with a scarab form, both gods embodying the 3-day life span of a blue-petaled, golden-disked water lily. The triad of scarab discs is clearly homologous with the common practice of portraying the Nilotic lotus, the blue lotus, in triplets, invariably in a configuration of 2 buds and a single blossom, as observed here in the Papyrus of Khepera in the Book of the Dead. This image attends a chapter entitled "Making the Transformation into a Lotus." The human head emerging from the flower represents the transformation of a deceased pharaoh into his floral form, before he is reborn into the fields of Ra. And the chapter reads as such: "Hail, thou lotus, the divine type of the god Nefertum. I am the man that knows you, and I know your names among the gods, the lords of the underworld, and I am one with you. Grant me to see the gods who are the divine guides of the aquatic underworld, and those who are the lords of the Amentet.